Week 14, top 5 things that I thought were the most important. I think the headline, the most important game, the thing we were all looking forward to, that was the showdown between the Dolphins and Chargers out here in Los Angeles, Herbert versus Tua. I appreciate so many listeners with the T's and P's after my week 1 going into week 2 thing I don't want to say out loud, where I felt like, man, after that first week, I'm like, I don't see it with Tua. And then he's basically had the best stats of any quarterback in the league. So now Tua's coming off the 2 worst games of his season. He was 10 of 28 last night, 1 touchdown. He hit Tyreek on a play where the defender fell down. That's the deal with Tyreek. Like, at some point, he's just going to break one. It doesn't matter. Waddle was invisible. And the Chargers just did a terrific job, I thought, just being physical and throwing off some of the timing route that they were supposed to be doing. Looking at the final numbers, I was surprised it was as good as 10 of 28. I'm serious. And apparently that's the worst completion percentage for a starting QB Miami's had in the game since 1980. That seems crazy that that's the worst in 43 seasons. So if I look at Miami last night in that game, at one point they had 4 completions in the middle of the third quarter, and they're still only down 17-14. This was still a game. Despite how bad this was, it was still a game. And I thought, you know what? This is the perfect Tua game. They're going to pull this out. I'm going to feel about Tua like I'm not going to feel great about these last couple of weeks, this game and the San Francisco game. The San Francisco game, he got his ass kicked physically. This game, he didn't. He just missed everything. It was bad. It was just a bad game. So I'm going, this is perfect. Because one of the most frustrating times in my life was being on the air doing the Tim Tebow run. Like, I knew he wasn't good. But then they'd win. I think there's a Dolphins game in there that's really weird. There's that Bears game that was, I would just go, what? I can't come into work on Monday and say I think he's good now. And then I think at one point I was like, maybe he just kind of has this weird thing where it raises everybody's floor. And you're like, nope, just really lucky. Got really lucky. Hits that game winner in the playoffs. You're like, nope, he just wins. And then he doesn't just win. And again, Tua, I'm not comparing him to Tebow. This isn't like this weird phenomenon, because here's the deal. This isn't a week to week. This isn't a he stinks last night, so now my week 1 thing is right. I'm actually not going to do that, right? I'm not one of those guys. The big picture thing is that Tua has stabilized not only his career, but he stabilized the Dolphins at the position, because the bigger picture of 22 has been really good for Tua. It's just the last couple weeks have been really bad. He doesn't run the ball that much anymore, by the way. He had 3 carries in his previous 3 games. Started to break it out a little bit last night when they couldn't get anything going in the passing game. So, again, long-term, this whole Tua story feels like a huge positive, and I'm not ready to, like, I wouldn't want to do the job that way. Be like, I told you after week 1, because I still wasn't even sure then. And then he has 2 bad weeks. Be like, hey, I was right all along. Here's what I am definitive about, okay? However, there is no sane football person that would want Tua over Herbert. Period. I know the numbers from Tua this year are better. You can definitely accuse me of the primetime perception thing here, but it wasn't close last night. And they're both 24, so we're actually going to have to wait multiple years before we have a definitive answer to what I don't think is a debate between these two. Number 2, 22 Brady is 19 Brady. Yesterday was brutal. I still can't believe Tampa won that game against New Orleans, but actually I should be able to believe it, because if you've been watching Bucs games all season, it's like, man, this team can't do anything right today. And then you're like, wait, they're a 2-point conversion away from tying this thing up or winning it. I mean, think how many games this year have ended with Brady in this moment. You're like, are you serious? They have a chance? That was not the story yesterday against San Francisco. They moved the ball a little bit, but when it came down to it, it wasn't happening. And it was a combination of a million things, including Brady not being good, because it was so ugly. You're going to start hearing the Brady stuff of like, all right, this guy should retire. That's up to him. Tampa Bay's 21st on 3rd down conversions. Let's compare Brady's 19 stats his last year in New England to this year in Tampa. Brady's completion percentage in 19 was 61%. It's still 66% in Tampa this season. 6.6 yards per attempt in New England in 2019. That was his worst in 18 years. Well, this year at 6.2, now the worst in his career. As QBR in 19 was 55.7. That was the worst of his career until replaced by this year's worst of his career at 51. The touchdown interception ratio was 3-1 then, 24-8, 17-5 now. He actually went 8 weeks, 8 straight games this season without a pick. He still only has 5. So when I looked at 19, Brady, there were real numbers that were jumping out to you going, what's going on with him? Now, they never invested in the skill guys unless they were discounted. And towards the end, it was pretty bad. It was pretty limited. And Brady's trying to find a way to make it work because he'd always found a way to make it work. Talent has been better in Tampa, and it's still this year's hurt talent has been better, even if the offensive line's a mess. They are throwing it 1,000,000 times. He's thrown it 109 times in his last 2 games. But as bad as the San Francisco game looked, because every conversation about Brady and the declining number, it's just funny that you're getting kind of an even worse version of the 19 Brady that New England said we're ready to move on from. They thought it was going to keep declining. They were wrong. He won a Super Bowl. It's one of the best revenge stories in team sports. I'm not guaranteeing if he's somewhere new, you win a Super Bowl with him that next year if he's gone after 22, but there's real similarities. I'm not predicting some massive bounce back like we had after 19 because now we're talking about being 45 as opposed to just in his early 40s. But the retirement part of it, he's still probably better than what? Half the QBs? At worst, a third of the QBs? If he wants to come back, as ugly as San Francisco looked, I'm not going to complain about it. Number 3, I don't think this topic is going to be covered anywhere else. Tough weekend for the Whites. Mike White cut in half by Matt Milano, linebacker for the Bills, who's a stud. I don't know if he's Fred Warner level, very protective of that. Prime Luke Kuechly. I know the comps, BC, like guy. I'm very protective of prime Luke Kuechly, but Milano is a stud. White looks like he might have broken ribs. Came back into the game. Didn't look that great. Okay, where's this going? Remember Sammy White, Vikings wide receiver? He had the team record for receiving yards in a single game. 210 back in 1976. Justin Jefferson finally broke it because it looked like he was going to break it every week. 11 catches for 223 and a loss to Detroit. Detroit, by the way, 6-7. Past 4 seasons, we've had a 6-7 team make the playoffs. Are you ready for Lions football? And finally, Kobe White. He did have a big defensive play last night against Atlanta. He hit an overtime 3, but overall shot at 4 from 12 after shooting 1 for 7 against Dallas. So there you go. Tough weekend for the Whites. Number 4, Cincinnati. They beat Kansas City. They apparently can't beat Cleveland until they beat them yesterday. Their last win was in Week 17 against the Browns in 2019. Again, they'd lost 5 straight. They lose T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd around the first series of yesterday's game. But they pull this one out with, I don't know if Hendrickson and Hubbard get nearly as much credit for the pressures. Like if you look at some of their pressure numbers, if you just watch the games a little bit, like this Cincinnati defense feels like it could carry an offense that was struggling yesterday. Now, that's what's even weirder about this game is that the Browns defense has been the issue. The Cleveland offense hasn't, but now with Deshaun Watson in, that's all we're paying attention to. And before the touchdown in the second half yesterday for Cleveland, the Deshaun Watson series had been really bad. Let's run through them. On the Cleveland side of this, the oddity was that Cleveland, whose offense was actually way better than I think people even realize, even that I realized with Brissett, you bring in Watson, and what this is now for you is Deshaun Watson practice the rest of the season. You're 5-8. That's all this is because he needs the practice. He is playing like somebody who hasn't played in 2 years. There is also the part of this where no one is rooting for you. They want the Deshaun Watson story to not work out. The resentment from other owners, from everybody else, that you got $230 million. The fact that the guy that has the most guaranteed money in the history of the sport is Deshaun Watson is going to bother almost everybody, right? They're also appears, it felt like yesterday when they started putting up how the Deshaun Watson series had gone since he had taken over as starter just a week ago. 10 punts, a couple field goals, a safety, pick, fumble. And people, anytime it's a punt, it's like, yeah, this isn't working. And then anytime it's a turnover, there's even more joy. And it felt like it got real specific on some of the bottom line coverage where it's like, look how bad this guy has been. All of that's accurate. But I'd ask this to anybody just from a football standpoint, just the football part of this. Do you think he's going to be bad? Because I don't. I think he looks bad. I don't think he's going to be bad. And that's really the conversation for him and going into next year. And finally, a stat that I've been looking for when it was first brought to my attention about the Titans' second half numbers, smashed by Jacksonville. I know what the final score was. That was a beating by a Jacksonville team. I don't know what to make of every other week, right? We're back to the good one. Tennessee is scoring 5.4 points in second halves of games this year. You know how when you're looking up something, maybe you don't because you don't host a podcast where I'll be like, hey, here's a number. Actually, this feels low. Let me see historically how low this is. Let me keep sorting it and going back past seasons. This one, I got sick of it. I was like, I hope this actually shows up here soon because I'm sick of sorting through this. 5.4 points in the second half of games. That is on pace to be the worst number we've seen in an NFL season since 2013 from Tampa Bay.